Welcome to my scientifically informed insider look at mental health topics. If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I wanted to answer a question that I received about the flat earth movement and what possible personality profile might we see associated with it or mental health symptoms. So in case you don't know, the flat earth movement, this is a group that believes that the earth is flat as opposed to spherical. And this isn't something that they're doing just to be funny or to kind of mix things up. Many of the members of this group actually believe the earth is flat. So there's a real conviction here in terms of belief. This is something that they actually believe. Now first, it's important to point out here that I can't and won't diagnose anybody who's not my client. So really here I'm just speculating about what we might see in terms of personality or mental health symptoms with some people that have this belief. There could be people that are members of that movement who have no mental health disorders and have a personality profile that's within normal limits, whatever normal is. So that's an important place to start. Something else I find interesting about this movement is, one of the curiosities here, is I didn't even know before I heard about this that there was debate over whether the earth was flat or spherical. I didn't know this was a thing. Usually when you hear about what some would call a conspiracy theory, it's about something that's at least debatable. For example, climate change. No matter what you believe about climate change, most people would have to agree there's still a debate going on. There is still a sizable portion of the population there that has doubts about climate change. I'm not aware of any sizable portion of the population that believes the earth is flat, other than this small group, of course, the flat earth movement. Now some may look at this and say, this is really just skepticism. This is good. In the scientific community, we need to have skepticism. We need to look at theories and be flexible. We need to be willing to believe something different than we believed before if we see substantial evidence that moves in that direction. But that's not really what we're dealing with here when we talk about the flat earth movement. This is beyond skepticism. This is really discounting all evidence. Now another interesting point that aligns this with conspiracy theory is if you look at the flat earth movement and kind of their core beliefs, they really seem to have a thing against NASA. And of course NASA would be an agency that's gathered a lot of evidence that demonstrates the earth is in fact spherical. So it makes sense they'd have to deal with NASA at some level in their belief system. But it's interesting because usually when we think of conspiracies, especially if we think of something that rises to a delusional level, and again, not everybody in this movement would be classified as delusional, but if somebody were delusional, a lot of times when we look at delusions, we see agencies like the CIA mentioned, the FBI, a general distrust for the government, but not NASA. It's curious that they would target NASA and target their credibility. It makes sense to some degree to have a healthy distrust of the CIA or the FBI because they are in part a secret organization. NASA is not a secret organization really. So I find this to be kind of an interesting facet. So this really counters this point that this is just healthy skepticism. No, there is a real conspiracy theory component, I think, to the flat earth movement. Also, we know members of this flat earth movement, flat earthers, tend to believe in a lot of other conspiracy theories. So they may believe in this theory of the flat earth, but they also have other theories, including the CIA and the FBI and other more common conspiracy theories. Another thing I find interesting here is that there doesn't seem to be any amount of evidence that can convince a lot of these flat earthers that the world is in fact spherical. So of course there's pictures that NASA's taken and all that, and those are discounted. But even if you have other evidence, and of course there is an amazing amount of evidence supporting that the earth is spherical, no evidence seems to rise to the level of significant for many people in this group. So they really can't be swayed from this belief no matter what is put in front of them. If evidence is presented and it appears convincing, oftentimes they say it was fabricated. So we end up here in kind of a logical dead end where there's no way to really reason and move forward So again, this is a departure from adhering to the scientific method. If these individuals were really committed to the scientific method, they would look at the evidence and at least be willing to consider that the Earth is spherical. And that's not really what we see here. With this group, we also see this tendency to believe what's seen. At least that's how it's kind of framed, like they believe evidence that they can see directly. Well, this is a pretty high burden of proof. A lot of us believe things that we can't see directly. We, at some level, take people's word for it. We take the word of scientists and other experts, but many people wouldn't have first-hand knowledge that the world is spherical. So this is a really high burden of proof, and they use what they call science, these experiments, in essence to try to beat science. They would probably say to extend science or to advance science. But really, they're talking about first-hand observations only, and that's not everything that's included in the scientific method. The scientific method does involve a community that builds on knowledge, that runs experiments, that looks for replication, and shares information. What we really see here is a number of individuals going out and pursuing single experiments. Now, this may seem like science, and again, to some degree, there's a little bit of overlap, but it's really not the same thing. So what could be going on here in terms of personality or mental health in areas like this? Well, again, there could be nothing going on. Many of the members could simply look at this theory and be intrigued and join the movement and believe there's something to it. There doesn't have to be a delusion or an extreme personality trait at work. Now, with others, it could also be a sense of belonging. I think there's probably a financial incentive for people that run this. I don't know. I don't have any evidence to support this, but usually with some type of conspiracy theory that's organized, somebody's making money. There could also be some extreme personality traits in play here. Particularly, I would think low openness to experience, so being very rigid and dogmatic, although you could also argue very high openness to experience could get you to the same place through a different method, extended fantasy, creativity, and imagination. In terms of agreeableness, it could be low agreeableness, simply being a contrarian, looking at evidence and saying, no, I'm going to discount this evidence no matter what it is. So antagonistic, argumentative, that could be a possibility. In terms of mental health, there are a lot of potential explanations: paranoid personality features, schizotypal personality features. So with the paranoid, of course, we'd have people that are paranoid and distrustful. With schizotypal features, we would see somebody who has unusual thinking, odd beliefs, certainly consistent with the flat earth movement to some degree. Again, for some of the individuals, that could be what's happening. And for some, it could just be a delusional situation. And we could see some of that with cluster A personality disorders like paranoid and schizotypal, but we could also see it with an illness like schizophrenia, and there's some other disorders as well that have a delusional component. And really, when we look at what qualifies as a delusion, it would be when somebody believes something that's contrary to overwhelming, significant evidence. And that seems to be what's going on here some of the time. Again, there's a lot of reasons somebody could join an organization like this or have these beliefs. A delusional frame of mind would just be one of these reasons, the presence of delusions. Another bit of evidence that kind of points to the presence of delusions, maybe in some of these instances, would be if you look at the explanations of how the Earth is flat as opposed to spherical in this movement. The explanations defending the flat Earth model are extremely complex, much harder to believe, much more full of fantasy than the actual scientific explanations that we believe are true. So the Earth is spherical, and its nature as being a sphere makes sense in terms of bodies orbiting the Earth and the Earth orbiting the Sun and all that. The flat Earth movement has to make up all of these really unusual mechanisms in terms of physics to explain how the Earth could be flat. And of course, one of the toughest would be, how come nobody's ever reached the end of the Earth and just driven off or sailed off? The popular explanation I hear for this is that NASA is guarding this wall of ice that exists at the edge of the Earth. So again, very fantastical explanations compared to what we actually know from science. So the last thing I'll cover here is really what I initially thought when I heard the flat earth movement. Remember, I initially thought that this can't be real. I didn't know this was a thing. I thought maybe this was a group of individuals who just wanted to call attention to how quickly we believe in what's popular, what's held by conventional science. We don't really question it, we just believe it. Turns out that doesn't seem, again, to be what this movement is about, but I think it's still an interesting point. It does make us pay attention to this idea of how do we know something's true? Are we a little too quick to just believe something? Somebody says something, we see it on TV, we see it on the internet, and we believe it. But maybe we should be a little more cautious, not to the point of discounting all evidence, but just healthy skepticism. So I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned from this flat earth movement, and really the whole movement and everything we see here is fairly fascinating from a personality perspective and again potentially from a mental health perspective. I hope you found this discussion of the flat earth movement to be interesting. Thanks for watching.